Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here at the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute. As you know, our mission is to preserve and celebrate East African art. And today we're here to have an artist talk for Tabula Rasa. The conversation is going to be between Peter Kamwathi and Jonathan Fraser. We're going to be talking about Peterson's work and Peterson's practice, and Jonathan Fraser is going to be leading the conversation. We also have Mr. Phil, who is a sign language interpreter, and he will be doing sign language interpretation today. Peterson Kamwathi has a drawing-based practice that examines how social and political histories are inscribed in collective behavior and everyday life. Working across media, he treats drawings as the foundation of every form his work takes. A discipline of sustained looking through which images, objects, and the human figure are gathered, redrawn, and placed in new proximity. His surfaces are built through the layering of dry media in combination with printmaking techniques, moving beyond fixed references to foreground the associative possibilities of source materials. Early in his practice, Kamwathi attended closely to the ceremonies that emerge whenever people congregate, in public spaces, places of worship, and the margins of everyday life. Reading the postures and formations of collective life, at the center of his inquiry is the relationship between the individual and the group, how arrangements of people carry the weight of shared social and political history without announcing it. A crowd assembles, a figure defers, a space is claimed or avoided. In these unremarkable moments, Kamwathi finds evidence of the relationships to place, to power, and to one another that organized social life quietly reproduces. Tabula Rasa is an extension of this thought, and today Jonathan is going to lead us through a conversation about it. So without further ado, I hand this conversation over to you.
Hi. First of all, can you all hear me well? Am I projecting well enough? Sometimes I've been told I mumble. It's really nice to see all of you. It's a really wonderfully sunny afternoon, so hopefully you've had a moment to feel that sun on your skin. Hi. We're joined in the studio by Peterson Kamwathi. Okay. My approach to this is I am an artist who works very deeply with drawing. We're just joking a bit of we take drawing really seriously at checking our drawing. So in the course of this conversation, one of the things I also want to encourage us to do is, allow ourselves to, freely associate different ideas. I think that's also something that in different ways comes up in Peterson's work. So imagine yourself in the studio with Peterson in a sense, right? The text that I did skip over, I will read it for you now. So this is an excerpt from Prose Architectures. This is Renee Gladman. She's a writer. She's a Trotsman. She writes also about drawing. So I think it's also pertinent to the conversation that we'll have now. She says, drawing extended my being in time. It made things slow. It quietened language. It produced a sense that thinking could and did happen outside of language. I saw it as a line extending from the body through the hand, as if something were being pulled or poured out of oneself. But here, finally, because it is impossible to achieve this in writing, in time with thought rather than chasing through syntax, as something already over, a moment we can now only describe. Drawing was going into time. It was pulling the process of thought apart. And what was most profound was that it left a record behind, a map, the drawing itself. I think it's useful because also this, in a general sense, is how I approach drawing as a thing being pulled out of me, but also as a map, as a record of something left behind. And I think that's really useful when we think about Tabula Rasa. That's what is the title of the show implying, right? I'm curious to know why you arrived to that title, and also want to kind of jump into that as well. So, yeah, please come in.
I've always enjoyed drawing, but I think just like most artists, I don't use the word, right at the onset. Drawing had always functioned as, one of the primary ways you'd make mark in preparation for something much more. Is it your painting? Is it your sculpture? But I remember when I did my first residency at the University of Kentucky, that's 2005. So my supervisor then was actually was a printmaker, and that's why he was, because I was doing a printmaking residency. But then part of his practice was also kind of this extremely conclusive drawing.
Like the drawing is the thing that is...
Yes, but actually for him, it wasn't the thing. It was basically, yes, in service of the print, but then his skill level was such that, I was basically blown away. And then prior to that, what I'd always do is, and for any printmaker in the room, you start by, beyond the sketch, sawa. Should I retain both? Okay. Sawa, it's okay. All right, much better. And I think so. So he's no longer with us, but he would actually create this beautifully, in my eyes, detailed drawings that would eventually end up becoming these amazingly detailed black and white woodcuts. When I came back from the residency, so two things happened. One is that I'd been creating these very colorful woodcuts, but then I felt like I'd hit a plateau with color. It's that moment whereby when I go back into the work, it doesn't really excite me anymore. And so I literally put a stop to, and this is around, I think, 2006, I literally decided to take a year from working with color and basically just focus on drawing. So, and part of the agenda I had, and I think I've never made my way back, was to actually study the color theories, try and look at color around me and see how does color function. But in the meantime, I'm still, and so the very heavy black and white drawings, and especially the sheep series, actually were the very onset of this thing of, I'm not going to work with color intentionally. So if you look at the very first, in the sheep series, they are totally black and white. Yeah. Then I think around 7 pieces down the line, some color starts creeping in. Exactly, at the bottom, very selective. But also, it's also because one of the things I'd struggled with is color, because I'd also seen color being applied in an extremely decorative way. And I felt, okay, I need to be careful that I don't wield it to mask. But also, how do I bring it in an extremely intentional, well thought out way? So take a break from color. I don't think I've touched color in the same way since then. So, wherever color is, it's very paired back. Huh? Apart from the piece, behind us. Okay, I take back that statement, but there was a very intentional break from working without color. Yeah. And what I did then is that I started drawing seriously, and with the intention of having those drawings existing as the end rather than part of the process. It's not like it's not preparation, it's the thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm curious about, because I think also like that now, it sets a bit of context for why you're drawing. And then what I want to also ask is to do with, again now, Tabula Rasa. How did we arrive to that?
So Tabula Rasa was specific to when I was invited by Don and the NCAI, to kind of, by Don to exhibit in the NCAI space. It builds up on a body of work I'd been developing from around 2018, which is The Noble Savage, which is a series that looks at looking at how the individual is situated within the context of a group. So prior to that was this exploration of how a group gets represented and how that by virtue of what you're looking at, it kind of leads you into what the concerns would be and also what brings about the emergence of certain physical groupings. Yeah, specific physical groupings. So, for those who remember, so work from prior to 2018, I had this generic representation of a group without the detailing, whereby you'd have the same form. I would literally repeat it and then give you the optics of a group without the detailing. And part of it was this argument I was making that in a group, the individual is erased and it doesn't exist. But then much later, and this is around as I'm coming to 2016 to 2018, I realized that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the individual was never erased, but then I was looking at a group from such a distance that I could never see the individual. And part of the function of a group becomes that. So then I started kind of thinking, how do I express the presence of the individual while still retaining the thought.
It's collective.
Yeah, and the thought and the, not imagery, I want to say the spirit, but I don't know how to do spirit. I mean, that would be a bit of a stretch. But, the structure and the thought, really, let me use the word thought, because that's, of what a group would be. And part of it was also the acknowledgement that this basic building block of any group will always be, and the individual has not disappeared. I mean, they might be suppressed in some shape and form, depending on the form of group you're in. So you have kind of Rousseau making this argument, and so the noble savage. So I'm building up Tabula Rasa, and his theory was this idea that communities and societies that actually evolve in isolation embody the greatest forms of nobility. What it is to be noble, not nobility as we know it. So nothing to do with royalty, but then also embedded within that evolution in isolation is also the capacity for the greatest brutality. That you'd have the highest form of what it is to be human or member of a community because you've evolved in isolation. But then also at the same time, it also means embedded in that is also the capacity for great violence when it comes to aspects of retribution, justice. I think that's right. So part of it got me looking at, you have a European who's making certain presumptions around the evolution of peoples that they've never engaged in, which is always it's a frame that's imposed. And of course, much later I realized that you have the context of almost like this distance, classification, definition, articulation of what other peoples are, that is not informed by any form of contact. And the information that they would use to come to these conclusions would actually be the experiences of others. So this is where your explorer and the missionary come into place. Because part of when they made the forays into these worlds that are not, European or Western, they would send back reports, send back letters, and those who would go back would actually have speaking engagements. There would be the celeb tour happening. But it also meant that it also introduced this particular frame of reference for peoples. So you'd say, how can you make the argument that people who evolved in isolation embody this when part of the marker of that evolution has to be isolation? So there's that. In a way, maybe also what drew me to that was it's an extremely provocative title. There's that, noble, savage. But then for me, it's also the sense that you have a framing which is extremely distant, but then which also, and this is just an extension of thought, also informs an extremely influential worldview, and of course agendas too. So it means that you have somebody who's making this big classification of nobility, evolving in isolation. Actually, it's meant to be perfect isolation. And now thinking about it, actually, it's also imagination informing. an aspect of imagination kind of informing this theory. Let me keep my hands together. I was told I move my hands too much. So part of it, I think, was you have that as not projected, because it's also an imposition of sorts, that also informs the frames with which those who come into the continent, and of course other parts of the world where, South America has that, parts of Asia also has that, coming into these spaces with these frames and making these extremely grand declarations to explain people and who they are, Then, of course, making the same linkage to Tabula Rasa and John Locke being a doctrine within, I think, Christianity. This is just loosely making that association. That also kind of informs the frames with which, I would say, the first missionary explorers kind of coming to the continent with the idea that it's empty. The idea that this sense of clean slate, and it means if it's clean and which means it's empty, it also means that it's also, and this is just me extending the thought, ripe for, I guess, some form of impartation or impact. I don't know. Imposition.
Yes. It's virgin land, it's untouched territory.
Yes.
All things.
Blanketing, flattening, and of course, could you argue that erasure is part of it? But then it's also this with what I'm saying with the Tabula Rasa as a title is also this assumption that's made that that what would be that empty is a place where there's nothing. I think early in the morning I was thinking, how do I frame this? That there's instead of acknowledging that my perception, interpretation of what would be a clean slate is relative. It's the assumption that we have a singular definition of what a clean slate is. It emptiness. I'm being careful with the word empty because I think as this show, when the show started, I kind of kept thinking maybe emptiness might not be the word for it.
Okay. To extend those thoughts also, one of the things that I was interested in thinking about was also the idea that, in Tabula Rasa is a Latin word, and so the literal translation of it is like a thing, like a plate that has been erased or scraped clean. So it's not just that it is like essentially empty, but like there has been some removal so that it is ready for something else to be added onto it.
Which is interesting with the text you read from René.
Gladman.
It's also this thing of, I think there's so the Romans, Italians by extension Romans would have this slate where they would actually, I think, either have wax on it, and I think at the end of the day, after you've made your inscriptions, you would either heat it and it melts, or you have slate the stone and you'd actually wash it off. But I just thought of the idea of also traces, that when it's done, there's always a trace. Sorry.
I think for me also why that is very interesting also has to do with, I guess, with what I have there as slippage and laminar flow, or maybe slippage, like porosity, let's say. So a lot of the work you are doing has several layers, both like literally in terms of like the material and the elements added on top of a support, like either the wall or the sheet of paper. But then also on top of that, it's layers of, I guess, meaning and association. And I'm curious are there any of these layers that are directly interacting with each other in the sense of like porosity? So some of these layers from the back influencing what's happening in the foreground, let's say. Or is it all very, in terms of laminar flow, like all of these particles are moving in a very parallel way. Nothing interacts with itself. I'm curious, especially because a lot of what we're seeing on the drawing on the wall, there's very many things repeated within the drawings that we have on the side. So whether that's like texture or different bodily positions, or like this what do you call it, cement barrier, there's things that arrive again and again, and I'm curious whether there's ways in which these things are actively interacting with each other. Very specifically, you bring them into the foreground, or what's happening there.
I think when I started looking at groupings, and this is just one, I was very keen on structures that are part of the everyday. I don't use the word familiar, but yeah, no, they are familiar. They're part of the everyday. And I think when you have something as part of the everyday, so it can also be its routine, it can be people, it can be objects, it can be objects, I would also say. I think even language has that, you use it long enough and it fades into the background. I was very keen on bringing in the almost like mundaneness, familiarity of what a group would be. We see people standing together, we see people queuing. And then it's also making the argument that they exist with such no familiarity, repetition, familiarity, yes, that you can actually make the argument that they are fundamental. That there's a certain sense of stability and the idea that you never need to invest attention because it will always be there and it is always there as a system. So in the wall drawing, what I have is that you have objects that all of us have.
Some association.
Exactly. Some of it might be, I think in most cases it's extremely physical. So what you have with the road dividers and barriers would be that. But then there's also the idea of plains and monuments are things that we are familiar with, either from an intellectual sense, but also from an extremely. So I'm fascinated by the everyday and that which is so in our lives that we stop seeing. So there's also that. Maybe I didn't get your question, Jonathan. I think maybe nimepotea. Yeah.
Basically.
So
no, but like I think there's things you've already answered in there of like how some of these things come through in the ways that we are having associations with them. I'm curious for you as the person who is bringing these ideas, these images, these objects into the compositional space, let's say. How is it that, or rather, how are you bringing them into interaction with each other? What's happening in the back? What's happening in the foreground? What's happening sort of in between? I think also having a mural on the wall is really useful because then that implicates, I guess, individuals between myself as a viewer and maybe somebody between what I'm seeing on the wall and myself, the person there. So I'm curious, what is it that is creating that interaction, that connective tissue?
So I think on one level, so there are two devices at work here. Yeah. One is that you have the familiar, that which you can actually adopt. Any of us can do that. You can stand in a queue, you can run. But then there's, of course, a certain commentary where I've used a device of absurdity. So the idea of the figures that are doing handstands on top of boulders. I mean, I'm hoping it inspires the acrobats to kind of take that as a new space. But so, and also within the drawings, you have this thing whereby I'm taking monuments which are, whose, I don't know face, I don't know. So monuments exist in a certain rootedness, which is, they allow a geography of elevation. They are rooted, to the earth. But then one of the things I keep saying is that my abilities as an artist is that I can actually, I can do that. I mean, I can do that within the space of, you're talking about the composition. So part of it is you have both that which is normal per se, which is the human form standing however mesimama. You also have that which is not conventional, which is the idea of the headless form, for example. But then there's also the idea of taking this huge, monumental. We need to find out the words. I mean, like the limitation. Thesaurus iko wapi, by the way, and literally making them. It's almost like taking that, the power that's part of their grounding, and removing that. So I'm presenting you with a form that is familiar, but then the position that it occupies within the composition is not familiar. So it means that, does it enable one to look at it again? Does it also kind of, because part of it is also, I'd love I think for myself, part of it is also trying to say that you have this thing that's presented as an object that embodies certain histories, certain power dynamics, and then mechukua nikaitana over. It's like a piece of chess now. Yeah.
I think also maybe, or rather, one of the things I have noted here is that I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think a part of your practice also has to do with a refusal of certain, I guess, ways of approaching an image, or ways of being in space. And so I think I can say, especially in the last series of works from about 2018 onwards, a lot of the compositions have become very visually unstable. Like you're saying, like all of these large monuments all on their sides, there's people sort of strewn into space. And I'm curious about that refusal, because as the exhibition text is like, there's not a neutral position that's being taken. But I'm also curious about what that instability is doing in the work, or at least maybe even in your practice in a general way.
I don't know if it's a refusal. I think one is it's maybe an awareness and a consciousness that maybe earlier on when I was starting out, and maybe a good chunk of my practice, I think I'm now more comfortable and maybe accepting of the complexities that are part of our own existence, individual but also collective. I think one of the things that I'm coming into is this thought that we move across time, but then part of that motion is not in a bubble that's an individual. It's actually the experiences of everyone who is alive on this earth. Like we move with that depth, that Jonathan is an individual, but then part of my own trajectory is also informed, whether I'm conscious of it or not, by your presence. So I go back and say 8 billion plus deep, and I know that's a bit of a stretch, but I think we actually move with a certain depth. So even in the work itself, what I've come to is also acknowledge and even pay homage to the complexity and the depth that is part of, I'll say our collectiveness. There should be a better word for that, man, Kizungu, though. I just thought, does anyone have a Swahili word for that? That would be better. Yeah, but part of it is also just acknowledging that I'm more at peace with complexity. I know I have the certain contacts I have within my individuality and also within the community around me, but then it also doesn't really invalidate that which is not within my contact. So there's a point I was talking to Beatrice a while back, and part of it was this thing that in this moment that you're talking, there's new life beginning, there's also life ending. There's somebody resting, there's somebody who's in a situation, a state of total upheaval, you know. Exactly. So I think part of this space that we call our humanity has a depth that I think, I want to say it's like we've all, you know, there's a whole subscription conversation now, but it's like, you know, the moment you're here, you become partaker of, I think that would be the word, you know, we partake in. So whether or not I know the person who's beyond that wall, but his reality is also part of my trajectory and movement. So the works are, for those who've seen my earlier work, you'd have this principal surface with kind of very little happening, you know, beyond text and all that. But then I'm working with layers and I'm acknowledging that part of my existence has all those layers, whether whether I'm cognizant of them or not, but they are still there, they do exist, you know. So I don't know, you know. But the other thing you asked about was about porosity also, and part of it I think was also when you talk about layering, part of acknowledging the under layers is just knowing that, you know, they will in some shape and form. They do, and I think they're also visible. Like part of the richness of what you're looking at on the surface is really the depth of that which exists below. You do that when you're drawing, you experience that. I'm sure painters also have a similar thinking.
Right.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess even in terms of like even in terms of material, is that better? Okay. Again, is still, yeah? Okay, cool. Even in terms of like the ways we're working materially with like paper and maybe spray paint, charcoal, what have you, I think there is an influence that a lot of what is happening underneath is, I guess, interacting with what's coming above. And I'm curious also how that works out in terms of like the spaces we occupy and all that, but perhaps we can touch on that a bit later.
How it works in terms of the space.
Yeah, but yeah, also the spaces again that we're occupying outside of the gallery, outside of the studio, outside of like as you're walking around, what is happening when you're interacting with like, you know, all of these layers of posters that have been, you know, accumulating somewhere, or like all of the runoff, because it's been raining recently, and so like if you're downhill somewhere, all of the trash has now found its way down with the silt and everything. And so I'm also curious how, I guess, our days and the ways we interact with the world are like interrupted or interacting with these previous layers that are now kind of just mixing with everything. I think I had another question to do with I guess the artwork as a document. Yeah, and like I guess, you know, a document being this object or thing that can convey information, and also be indexed with other things. And so like in a sense, the exhibition is an index, the work therein is the documents within that index. I'm curious if that is something that you agree with, what is perhaps being documented in your work, if at all that even is pertinent.
I hadn't, I mean, that's, it's not a consideration in the work. One of the things I know is that I'm bringing kind of all these facets. You know, some of them are historical, some of them are extremely contemporary, some of them are the place of ideas and thought, some of them are the physical world we exist in, into the work. So, but then by virtue of, you know, of doing that, I'm not sure whether the work can sustain the fidelity, really, of what a document would be, because it's extremely subjective. It's extremely, in as much as they are shared, well, I mean, they are recorded, documented, and then maybe you can make the extension of shared aspects in the work itself, I'm not sure whether the work would pass the test of what a document would be. So it's not objective, it's extremely subjective. So if subjectivity is part of documentation and archiving, I think I had the word archiving thrown in there, you can't archive this. This is yeah. So, yeah, I guess maybe I'd probably be very bored if I was trying to work with pure data. But this is extremely subjective. And I think most artwork kind of falls in that space of extremely subjective. But then it is also a record of my own perspectives. And I think within the pantheon of, what you do and all the artists in the room and all the artists in the world do, maybe there are threads that would actually can be referenced, going forwards as being of this particular moment, of this particular time. But then my abilities and skills are jafika hapo bado. So, yeah. What do you think, Jonathan? Is it a document?
I do think so. I would consider, at least in a sense, it is a document, perhaps not in the standard approach of what a document could be, but I would say, in a way, it is a document of how you are moving through the world and some of the things you're seeing. A document perhaps also of even very specifically what it looks like to, if you are moving in a certain space, there's a way in which your body also takes on a sort of choreography. And so there's the choreography of like, we are walking, from point A to B. There's a choreography of, I am curious what's happening there. Let's all kind of crowd and see what's happening. I would say that these are some of the things I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about like the work as a document, and perhaps also as a document of how does Peterson look at the world? And perhaps in a way, once myself as a viewer, like once I'm interacting with these things, it's also like, it could also be a document of how the work is interacting with me, right? I think that gap in the mural where you have three figures standing, in a way, I've seen enough pictures and I've seen enough people standing there where it's like they're inserting themselves, right? And so even that becoming a document of like the posture you take on when maybe there's a gap there, right? Like, I don't know, I guess maybe these are just some of the ways I'm thinking about the word document and the way we access some imagery and yeah.
Yeah.
I want to...
Can I just, and this is just a short one. The other thing is that I think I usually make this argument that the spectrum of our experiences, or really, I think the parameters of how we socially define ourselves is not as broad as we think it is. I think, when it comes to it, I think culture, language, all this stuff kind of creates this illusion that we are so, broad and wide. But then I think at its essence, the body recognizes itself, but also itself in others. There's also that reality. And I think across, the ages, the idea of what, I'll use the word humankind, let's use the word humankind, is that spectrum ni kidogo hivyo. It's that narrow. So in most cases, what I'm aware is that when somebody looks at the work, when I look at your work, there are certain plugins that I'm able to very directly connect to or make, it's make. And that's, I think, just on the basis of the fact that we have that spectrum in kidogo. It means that the resonances are there. And in a fairly accurate way, you're able to tap and plug into that. Yeah, so.
I'd like to shift gears a bit and I guess bring us into your studio. I'm interested in line, color, form, texture. When we were here during install, we're looking through a lot of your drawings with Don, and one of the things that came up at least, I don't know, a handful of times, let me not put a number to it, is how does he do it? You know, how are you getting those textures? How are you bringing all of this, I guess, softness into what we're seeing here, and especially into the case studies that we have here. So what we have behind, what we have behind us is consternations. I think it's a useful artwork to like use as a case study, especially just because I feel like there are many of the different kinds of ways you're working presented in like just this one image. And I'm curious how technically, what are some of the things happening here? I mean, I can maybe guess at using stencils, I can guess at like, traditional rendering techniques, but I'm just, talk to us about how are you making things? How do these things arrive to us as they are? Because I've seen this particular work a lot earlier on when it had, I think, the cotton ball, the sisal plant, the bird in the corner. But here we are now, and it's so different from then. What is happening in between? How did you arrive at like this richness of imagery, let me say?
Welcome to the studio. This is so let's shift. I'm always working kind of on multiple pieces at the same time. So I have two workspaces. So I have a space at home that I consider to be a studio, but then I also currently hold I just moved into another space on the other side of town. So I think I usually say at the core of the work is basically drawing, So in this particular, I don't know how to approach it. This is a difficult question, Jonathan. So can I just talk about this piece? Maybe that will be easier. So I'll take us through this piece. So I had this thought. So the form of the lady, and you'll see that repeated in the other works on exhibition where you have the human figure is at the point of composition not connected to all the other elements in the work. They actually exist independently. But then part of the argument I'm making that we move across with that depth has to do with all these other factors that come into the work. So the actual piece, the configuration beyond the human figure of this lady. So this lady was a lady who sat outside my studio. I was in the studio, I had a sheet of paper on the wall, and it was empty. I hadn't decided what to do with it. She would sit there and browse. She used to work. And then I decided to make a quick line drawing of her. She doesn't know that this happened. So I just remembered that. And so she's actually seated on this bed. For those who know, if you know they go down, they all go down. You could see the umbrella benches there. But then she'd actually browse. But then as I was developing the work, and this is overall the body of work, and thinking through aspects of history, I also decided to pay homage to transmission. That part of the references I'm making, they're not self-generated, they're also kind of, looking at documentaries, reading books, coming across reels and posts online that would kind of trigger my thoughts into this direction, the idea of looking at the individual represented, but then also the articulation across history. So the consternation, if you guys were to how do you make your eyes narrow enough, you'd be left with the color configuration chart for the old TV screens. So there's a point where you have a white bar, you have a yellow color, a light blue, a green, and whatever. And so that's a color calibration bar. But the idea is that I do the drawing, and then as I go along, the other elements would come in. And some of these works have taken a couple of years to do. So the elements in this work have to do with situations where you have symbols, imagery that emerge on the back of groupings that go beyond borders, so that are not specific to nations or ethnicity, but then beyond border. But then, of course, paying homage to the screen as one of the ways in which this particular awareness or as a catalyst for this direction of thought. And then, of course, having the lady there, I'm not telling you her name, but the lady in there as being this almost like inactive participant in a world that directly impacts her, both historical but also contemporary. Yeah, but also the medium of the screen kind of becomes that, 4:4, So the techniques in these works are drawing, charcoal is in there, stenciling, woodcut, silkscreen. There's a time a while back in my studio at home, I took out all the tools that I've accumulated over the years, wood cutting tools, paint brushes, charcoal, pencils, and all that. And I had this desire, I think I was telling Don at some point, to create the perfect image. So one of my dreams is to make one artwork that will be a whole exhibition. So you walk in, you look at one artwork, and that's it. So, yeah. So if you see me guys trying to do that, just, yeah. So I haven't gotten there yet, but still getting there. So constellation has to do with that. I mean, it's all, yeah. Some of the symbols are recognizable, so the 4:4s will be highly recognizable. Some of them are extremely abstract, that green portion there. It's only me who knows what that is, yeah.
I'm curious also what it is that, because you've mentioned that there's like quite a variety of working, of ways that you're working, of tools that you're using. I'm curious what's influencing, deciding to work in a print making capacity, let's say, working with woodcut versus a stencil versus like traditional drawing. Like, what is it that is drawing your hand to arrive at like the pencil instead of the the chisel, let's say? What's happening? Is it very direct and specific that, okay, this is something I'm working towards, or is it like very intuitive? Like, how are you approaching these?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good one. One is there's a point whereby I'd work in a single medium. So for those who know, I do charcoal drawings, and it will be charcoal, maybe pastel itaingia tu hapo kidogo, just to to disrupt. But then I think part of my awareness part of my existence is it's layered. It's layered both visually, in terms of what you're looking at. It's layered in terms of what you're able to see. I mean, objects that are closer to you will be clearer, versus objects that are further from you will be. I mean, that's part of, the science of the eye, how that functions. Somebody closer to you, you can hear them clearly, but somebody is further from you, If somebody speaks to me in French, I only know a few words. But it means there's a connection, in as much as there's something I was actually now interested in reading part of your text, is also the idea that it's not linear. It's not a progression of A leads to B. It's both A, Z, B, 1, 2, 3, zeros and ones are part of our own existence. So I started kind of trying to find, how do I express that complexity that's part of our, within our frame. And then, of course, this awareness that different mediums, different tools will give you marks of a different visual quality. So if I draw with charcoal, it's a whole different visual texture compared if I draw with a graphite pencil or a colored pencil. If I do a stencil, I can only get so much detail before I'm not able to get anything. A woodcut and an etching, completely different. So I'm actually fascinated by variety of marks, and also the idea of within the work itself, and this is something that I think I'm exploring even going forward, is also leveraging the visual quality of marks. Sometimes even the physical quality, because a woodcut is on the surface of a drawing here. You can actually touch it and you'll feel that it's two different textures. Oil-based printmaking inks on top of pastel or spray painter. Exactly, and that's fascinating. But it's also, you made this description earlier of, as you're walking and you're seeing, debris flowing down. It's also part of the variety of textures that actually exist in the world around us. So yeah, so that's fascinating. I'm still kind of trying to also make sense of how do I do more with that? Let me just leave it there.
Yeah, I think I like the description there of like a variety of mark making techniques, but also I think there's something there of I guess visual fidelity. Like there's like a crispness or like a degree of detail that is achievable in one way than another. I'm curious also, okay, I guess this is maybe somewhat of a tangent, but like I'm curious about how the practice of printmaking is also figuring into how you work. It's very much like drawing, I would say, in a way almost central to how you're also making imagery and thinking with the different ideas that you approach. I'm really interested in how, or rather, like I would invite you to speak on what the process of transfer is doing there, because like printmaking by necessity requires you to be transferring not just an image but also material from one surface onto another. And so I'm curious what it is there that speak on it.
I mean, I think printmaking is one of the I do call it techniques or mediums. What's the name? What's the classification? So I tend to, every so often, I tend to go back to printmaking. The reason is I've found that it actually forces me to slow down. So there's a directness to drawing on paper directly, pencil, that I think printmaking is extremely technical. There's a certain resistance that the surface. I'm playing around with copper, cotton etching, but I have this desire to actually do color etching, which is extremely, for me anyway, maybe somebody has cracked it, but I found it extremely difficult. So the resistance of technique and medium allows me to kind of slow down. Sometimes I think also I do get bogged down by, I go into this space where things are not clear because I'm able to make marks extremely fast. But then I realize that sometimes when I slow down kidogo, I'm much more intentional with the image that I'm making. I also appreciate the visual quality of the printmaking techniques. I think the only one I've done that I never liked was stone lithography. So
really?
Yes.
That's okay.
It felt very much like
because that's basically just drawing and then transferring that.
Yeah, but why do that? It's just
okay.
Draw. I mean, it's as simple as just yeah. I mean, if you want to make reproductions, get somebody to drawing and make it to a silk screen and then or digital.
Okay.
Yeah. I did it a couple of times, but it was extremely boring. But the others kind of introduce. There's a visual quality to the image and to the marks.
Right.
That is actually entirely pegged on the technique itself. Mm-hmm. So etching, you can get the finest line.
Yes.
But it'll still, you can't make claim that it's an ink drawing. There's actually 2 works in this space that I brought in from the collection by Anthony Mega Njogona, and those are ink drawings. And it's very easy to assume that one is an etching, but it's not. If you look at it closely, you realize a pen drawing is different. So part of it is, I think for me, printmaking allows me to slow down, which also means, I think every so often I do need to do that. I do need to kind of, I need to kind of be locked into the resistance of what that technique is and that the medium is. And then it's also mechanical. It's also thinking in reverse, like you say. It's also knowing that there are limitations to how much detail I can get. It's also knowing that there's of course a science of it. Like with etching, I'm having to contend with the chemistry of it, which is also a lot of fun, but extremely messy if one is not careful. But yeah.
Just a bit of a pulse check. How are we doing sound-wise? Are we all still good, or could we? So far, so good. Okay. Okay. Let me gather my thoughts. I need to slow down. I like the fact that you've brought in this element of slowing down, or perhaps maybe modulating how quickly information is moving, because I'm interested in like, okay, what does it mean for you to work in a medium like animation, or like, let's, in a broader sense, film or moving image, where essentially, okay, this is my understanding of it. Essentially, this is a medium that is a modulation of time specifically, whereas perhaps the printmaking is something that is literally like, it is having to slow you down, whereas I think the animation is something that you are now contending with time in a very different way. And I'm curious, how did we arrive at this animation cycle? I know you studied animation. Am I wrong to say it's Shangtao? Yes, okay, there we go, yeah. So perhaps, talk a bit more about also like what's happening in this video and what that relationship to time and I guess also information is, but specifically time, yeah.
I mean, that's an illusion. What you're looking at, the moving image you're looking at is actually, it's basically 66 pencil drawings of the postures that someone adopts when they're throwing a stone one time. Yeah. I had this desire to do kind of 10 stones, but somewhere along the way I realized, overkill. But I think there's actually a connection to part of how I slow down time, and then so there's one in etching, it slows you down. Actually, I have a Casio digital wristwatch because it has a second timer. So if you're immersing copper plate into the solution, I have to time it. Within the drawing space, I work on multiple drawings at the same time because it means that I can break the cycle of start to finish on a singular piece, and spread it kind of around, 7 pieces. But it's basically 66 frames that if I was to isolate them, you basically just have individual, they're basically all drawings. I have them actually in a folder at home, and they're all pencil drawings. But then the computer, for those who can do editing on Premiere or Final Cut, you can actually animate stills. So the piece you're looking at has 126 times 2. It's called double framing. It's basically just looking at the human posture. Well, the human form in the act of throwing a stone. Now, whatever interpretations you'll make of that kind of is beyond that action, So I feel like I've not responded to that one.
No, I'm okay. I think one of the things you said when, I wanted to maybe do 10 stones, but that felt like overkill, is interesting because the video is on a loop, so just watch it 10 times technically, no? But
I've done, you curated a drawing exhibition where I presented the drawings instead of the moving image.
Yeah.
Where literally, and what I've done is I literally presented the actual motion, the actual still frames, rather than have the work exist as an animated image. And part of it was also the idea that if the eye follows it long enough, you'll actually make sense that this is the beginning and this is the end of this particular movement. So you have time embedded in it, but in this case, the optics, the illusion of motion has not been. I know at some point I considered presenting 66 of these on the wall, but I do like where we ended up. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? For now, like I think we'll approach that again in this next section, which is bodies, because there are bodies in here. And I think while we're still on the animated work here, I'm curious what your relationship to the body is, both in terms of the work that is happening here, but then also outside of that, in terms of how perhaps we're thinking about all these different ideas to do with. Hold on, I have my notes here. Yeah, all of the things that we're thinking about when it comes to how we make associations to do with, like, oh yeah, the noble savage, and this is how, you know, a society sort of articulates itself when it's left in isolation or not. So yes, please talk to us about the body. What does it do for you? What does it mean to you? Personally, within my own practice and also in general, the body is very central to the ways in which I'm thinking through the world. And so I'm curious, what is that for you?
I think there's the body. There are two facets, and this is also linked to what spoke earlier. One is that the body is extremely familiar, but then it also is extremely alien. You know, that we recognize ourselves, but then also sometimes we don't recognize ourselves when you look at. And I think what I've done over, and this is maybe from around 2009, is also trying to use a human figure. Let me use a figure, and I want to be careful not to use the body, because I also know there are certain depths to how the body has been, kind of, within the creative and the artistic space. But then I'm interested in the figure. One is that because it's also recognizability, which makes it a much more easier point of entry into the work itself. Like, we look because the form is there, you know. But then also, there's also I can highlight certain issues by co-opting the figure in a certain posture. So the forms that are bent over, the forms that are doing the handstands, the running form, the form in a fetal position, the form in, you know. So it's also knowing that collectively we ascribe, there's a certain interpretation we've ascribed to the human figure, not his body, in that position that recognizes. So it actually aids whatever it is I'm trying to kind of express within the work itself. And I've done that with the human body, the human figure cubing. I'm stepping away from the body because the body is, and there are artists in this room who can speak more to what the body becomes, historical, even spiritual as a thingy. But I'm more interested in the figure. And I think part of this is also an influence of an interest in animation, the idea that you have this movement, but it's also knowing that collectively there's a certain symbolism that we have embedded in the body in certain positions. So you have in the works, or some of the works, you have the human figures in these postures that are not conventional to what the figure represented on a monument would adopt, for example. Exactly. And of course, even the dressing is not ceremonial, it's not regalia, it's part of the everyday. So I think, the function is, there's that recognizability, but then of course, I also think it's also fascinating as a form. It's extremely versatile as a form. Yeah.
I guess, okay. I had my question also to do with your distinction between the body and the figure, or the human figure, let's say. I want you to talk about that a bit more, and I'm curious also if the application or rather the ways you've applied the figure within your work. I'm curious if, I don't know, let's say anonymity or like anonymizing, I don't know if that's a word, anonymizing a lot of the figures we have here, because there, I would say, like, very few things or figures here that are directly recognizable as, so and so. I mean, perhaps if you have the leakage, you might know who is Peterson's who is Peterson's sitter. But yeah, I'm curious also, like, where that distinction comes in of like the body versus the human figure, and how it like figures into your work.
I think the body, I think any artistic endeavor to express the body is successful when there's an emotional quotient to that expression. So all the figures you'll see in my work, there's no emotional layer. And I'll give you an example, the artist in the room. So, Jonathan, I'm looking for the body in your work. Okay, so one of our favorite painters, Beatrice Wanjiko, has at the core of her practice the body, not the figure. Yeah, so it means you have a layer that's extremely emotional. Yeah, but for mine, the figure is much more intellectual. It's much more illustrative. It's less to do with I wanted to say the murkiness, but I would say kind of the complexity. That's a better word of what the emotion will be. And I don't think I've yet come to a point whereby I'm able to express the figure in a way that it becomes an evoker of emotions. So there's recognition, there's familiarity, there's a resonance that's much more visual and that's much more physical, that doesn't go beyond the surface of the skin. This is my interpretation of my own work. If I'm wrong, guys, you're welcome to do that. And I mean, Michael, you're here, so I'll put you on the spot. That it's also the approach of you're looking at the figure and it has. I think maybe when I was doing the charcoal drawings, you could make that, but then I'm not sure whether in the current work, and this is from 2018. So for me, because I'm also looking at it almost like a schematic. It's what you do with, the toy soldier figurine. The green ones, So you have kind of a certain recognition that it's a template, really. But then you can make the commentary, on towards conflict and the brutality that is embedded. But that toy soldier will not be what expresses that effectively. This is my own interpretation, and I think I'm a fairly good of that, because I've been trying to figure it out for some time. Yeah, but I think when you speak of body, and this is just not to drag it on, when you speak of body, I think it's also talking to beyond the surface. There's all this that constitutes the spiritual man, the emotional man, the mental space, and all that. But mine are extremely distant.
Okay. I mean, maybe, I don't know if you'd be able to answer this now, but like, would you say there's an emotional center to the work you make? Does that end up in the work, or is it outside of it, within yourself?
No, it's more intellectual for me.
Okay.
It's not emotional, and it's something that I've always said. I haven't gotten there yet, and I'll be very happy that I get there.
Do you want to get there?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. So, Next, yeah, next section and also final section for me at least is to do with space. And so this is in the sense also of like space, not just in terms of the studio space, although that is an aspect of it, but space in terms of who are you thinking with, who gets to come into the studio, in terms of like who are you reading, who are you interacting with, who are you looking at? I read a text that Elspeth Court wrote about your work in 2010. Hold on, let me just find it here and read it out. So Elspeth Court is a writer, I guess academic as well. She wrote in 2010 for an exhibition that you had with Ed Cross Fine Art, or rather she reproduced part of a conversation you guys had via email where you say, and so in quotes, in a conversation with Tafuma Gutsa, a Zimbabwean sculptor, when on a residency at Corner Trust, he encouraged me to look for Bruce. Bruce Onabrakpe is one of the most senior and influential artists of Africa, and a part of his practice involves experimental printmaking techniques in which he has explored new dimensions in the media. I have a passion for printmaking practices. I interpreted Tafuma's statement as not only making the physical journey to visit Bruce's studio, but also as a challenge to continually redefine my creative boundaries. I'm still looking for Bruce. And now, that was 2010. In 2026, are you still looking for Bruce? Did you find him?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, so this is, yeah, it just took me back. So this was, Jonathan did tell me he was going to read this. But I think I'm still looking for Bruce. I think in the sense of when you're reading, so Bruce Onabrekpe, Nigerian artist, he's really, he's, yeah, so.
A defining figure.
Defining figure, yeah, totally. But when I was saying this, at that point, printmaking was at the core of my practice. And actually, I think this conversation was printed in 2010, but I think we'd spoken 2 years before. That's around 2008. So it's part of a build-up of conversation we're having. Actually, we're still talking up till now. But Tafuma Gutsa, so both Bruce and Tafuma. So Tafuma is a Zimbabwean. There's those who would know Tafuma's work. Sculptor who's pushed beyond the traditions of Shona stone sculpture into installation, performance. And I got to meet him. I think it's also those moments when really meeting the person creates these major shifts in terms of possible worlds, almost. And so we had this conversation, and I'd ask him questions. How do you, keep forging new directions in terms of sculpture? And then, of course, the reference he made was you're a printmaker, and there's what Bruce was doing. So Bruce kind of took printmaking from the space of wax on paper into installation. And I think you'd show with October Gallery. I don't know that still is the case. I've not followed this there. So am I still looking for Bruce? In a spiritual sense, yes. In a physical sense, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So, but because I think it's more the awareness that pushing boundaries of medium, and I think even part of this exhibition is that yes, I'm exploring, I'm in the drawing space, but then what can drawing become? So I think when I find him, Jonathan, I'll send you an email also.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you brought up, expanding perhaps what drawing can become, because then that brings me to think of the mild steel sculptures that you have on display in Gallery 3 and 1, and to tie it also to what, we're talking about space, who comes into the studio. I'm also curious about who you work with, because I know you've mentioned that there's a metal worker. You work very closely with when developing these sculptures. I also want to think of them as drawings in space. So like when you're developing these sculptures, you're like working very closely together. I'm curious, who are you working with in perhaps that regard, but also who are you working with in terms of, much like in printmaking, transferring information? You know, what does that look like? You've had, what do you call them? You've had workshops and other people come into the studio, have conversations in this sense. Yeah, talk about that a bit more, please.
About the sculptures and the workshops. No, I think I call them drawings because really the source impression is actually an ink drawing. So it's very easy to call it a sculpture, but so that we don't have any mistakes in the future, please just call them drawings. In the same way that's not a mural, that's a drawing also. One of the things so the metal drawings, I'll also fall into the trap of calling them a sculpture, courtesy of Jonathan, are actually the original idea, which was a few years ago, a number of years back, was I realized that when you look at an artwork on a wall, the relationship it's a certain confrontation, it's confrontational. So there's a point I had this desire, and I still have, of how do I pull that from the wall, whereby we all exist in the same space, you know, volumetric-wise anyway. But at a minimum, those pieces are almost as flat as a drawing would be. So, but I don't cut metal myself. I don't have the skill for it, and I'm not sure that I want to invest time in learning that. There are guys who do them extremely well, but I have a team around me led by a gentleman called Peter Muigai, who over the years is one who brings together the work. So I go, I draw. The act of drawing is I make the drawing myself with a piece of chalk. Then there's someone who folds and cuts with gas. We correct as we go along. Then once I have the elements together, I have my studies and I'll hand them over. And then of course follow. So it was also a learning curve in terms of acknowledging my work even when it is the hands of others that have brought the final thing together. So it's also working, would you call that collaboratively? In some shape and form, I mean, yeah. So, you know, instructions on polishing, whatever. And it's one of the things that also with the first animation I ever did, I had a team around me. This one I did it, you know, but it's very easy to do that. And then, of course, with the workshop, printmaking is also an extremely communal, it has a very communal edge to it. One is that also because as a printmaker, the infrastructure to make it possible can be communal. So we don't all have to own printmaking presses, but they can be part of the shared infrastructure. So I have a small press that travels around. And then in my last studio before I moved, I did from around 2020 to 2024, I did a series of technical workshops for young artists. So it was basically artists who've never done printmaking, and it was just teaching the techniques. So I wasn't teaching them to be artists, already brilliant in their own right, but had an interest in that as a medium. And then, of course, leaving them to their own devices. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gives us a sense of how a lot of information, a lot of working methodologies are moving across. I would also maybe ask you, perhaps, what are you reading, what are you listening to? I know there's that time we had a meeting and Gogeo Theongo's YouTube, was it a lecture, I think?
Yeah.
I forget.
Yeah.
Creating African Memory or something like that.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, so who are you reading? What are you reading?
Currently, Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon, part of a reading group, and I think the other culprits of the reading group are in the room, so Brayo and Kelvin. teaching me the Gen Z lens of looking at Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. It's one of the slowest reads we've ever done, but it's the most fulfilling. So every Monday, 5:30 to 6:30, we read and we talk. I do more listening. Sometimes I get carried away. So Kelvis is the principal. He's in the room up here. So at some point, could I ask him to stand up so that we put them on the spot? These are both artists, so painters, amazing thinkers. I think one of the, for me, biggest takeaway from this has been the fact that I think generationally there's also this fallacy of assuming that we're the custodians of thought, and then realize that each generation really masters and locks in the place of thought. So I'm back to school in this regard.
Okay.
Music, what am I listening to? Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man, which is, during the opening, I think it was part of the playlist.
Yeah.
And then my young son, who's 8, has introduced me to funk, so, which is, I'm still trying to get my ear around to it. So wish me well. I think some of you know what funk would be. What else am I listening to? We just started listening to Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, which is something we just, as me and my kids, so, which is also a lot of fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm curious how long this reading group has been running for now.
I think the better part of this year. Yeah, from January or no, December. January, yeah, so we've been at it. We are still in chapter 1, which is concerning violence. So if you guys have any hacks as to how to kind of move on to chapter 2.
So much appreciated.
Yeah,
okay.
much appreciated.
Cool.
Yeah,
I mean, okay. For me, this was where my conversation has reached, but like, do you have anything else you want to share before maybe you open it up for the Q&A?
The book we're thinking of that, it's actually one of his, I think, it's a YouTube was it a keynote or a conversation?
Yes.
But he also talks about how language is really how culture and memory kind of gets articulated. And I think he's always been pretty intentional in the fact that we need to have a place for language. I think there's a certain sensitivity that grassroots language systems have. They articulate their world better than. So it's one of the things I'm thinking through. And then I think one of the things we do also within the reading group is that we do a mix of both Kiswahili and English, because it's an easier conversation.
Yeah.
So of course, the other thing is also knowledge that comes across to us is not infallible. So one of the things we are extremely intentional on is the fact that Frantz Fanon wrote a book, published in 1963, I think, but it doesn't mean that he had everything
figured out.
The people this idea of great explorers, Livingstone and Stanley, at their most basic, they were human beings. You wake up in the morning and you have malaria, the way you look at the world changes, and whatever letters and definitions you write will also be informed by that. So it's also knowing that what has come to us is not...
it's not final. It's not
perfect. It's not. It's not sacred, because I think history transmitted kind of as this sacred thing. It's way up there. But in reality, at its essence, the mediums were human beings with all the complexities that human beings embody. Myself, I have good days, I have bad days, and so did the person who wrote Wretched of the Earth. Okay.
All right. Thank you. One last exercise before we open it up to the Q&A. I want us to look at those images again. And the reason I didn't tell you much about their context is that I kind of want you to just approach, I wanted you to approach it as, imagery. The artwork on display within this series of images, these are all within NCAI's collection. So if you are interested, I've been told it's accessible. So, talk to somebody and you can have a tour of the collection. The other thing that I'm using are like these images that I've taken screenshots from Google Maps. So the Street View setting is like basically an image archive in a way you can actually look back through several years in a specific location. And so part of what I'm also hoping is that certain associations come up, others maybe are not, cleanly, they don't come together cleanly, but yeah, that's the exercise there, right? Okay, so one last time and then Q&A.
Hello, thank you for this event. Something I was interested in, because I was reading your descriptions, captions, I'm not sure. I was reading these, and what comes through is that they're deeply political. So the thing that I was thinking about, which is interesting how you brought up that you're reading Wretched of the Earth, but the discussion of space is something that in today's age is extremely political. I'm in a deep Mbembe rabbit hole about necropolitics and how space is divided. And I thought it's interesting that I'm staring at this one here, Flavor Your Strawberry, and there's a heavy military presence in this, and I see there as well. So I was wondering what you were thinking about the relationship between state, people, and space. Thank you.
So the drawing you're looking at, Flavor Strawberry, for those who, the first Mandamano was in 2024 and also 2025. The phrase comes from the 2024 one. But the actual drawing started with the form of the child. And everything else kind of gets built around it at different times. So the drawing, well, I wasn't going out to really lean towards what would have been the political, but it's just that as I was working on this drawing, and the drawing was in the space, all these events were happening. But then in all the works, I'm making this commentary that in as much as you might have the figures that you're looking at, the forms that are central to the composition are not connected to the environments that they're occupying in reality. It only happens in the work itself. So you have a benign, almost like innocent form of a hanging. Well, a child who's, trying to swing off something. There's also that, which happened. I was there. It's real. But then you also have the elements and the facets to a context where there is some form of social, political upheaval. So the work has all these facets, but then at its core you have this principal participant who's, I don't know, maybe you could make the argument that this is a documentation of sorts, going back. I hadn't looked at it that way, but the idea is that you have all these facets that have to do, so some of the facets in the drawing itself are not linked to the protests, but they're also of places where those protests took place. So the facets that are above the child's head is of the building of the Kangemi Bridge. There's a bridge that will take you towards Loresho, coming off Wayaki Way. But also that particular scene was also a place where protests happened, but not at the time I was expressing that in the work. So the relationship between, I hadn't gone out to make that kind of commentary, but yeah. I don't know, did I just unpacked the image. I didn't speak to the greater truths of space, politics, and yeah.
If you don't mind me interrupting, I think just to build on what Peterson is saying, I think what's also interesting about that image in particular, and about this body of work in general and some of what Peterson is doing is that to think about the state and individuals and people and to think about space, I think in many ways that question or that consideration is precisely the sort of thing that looking at Peterson's work sort of produces. As he said, these aren't necessarily specific. There's no sort of linear narrative that this image is anchored to. But at the same time, all of these images are referenced to different events. The title, the images, the different groups of people, they're all, in a way, they make reference to different historical moments, to different events. They make sense to even certain forms and configurations that Peterson has used in previous iterations as work. The question of militarization is something that's shown up in the work again. And I think it speaks to that idea that these relationships are always shifting, that there's always an ongoing negotiation. There's always different things that people do to lay claim to space, consciously or unconsciously, whether it's through the producing of certain documents, or thinking about maps, or thinking about archives, whether it's through the way people congregate in certain spaces, physically, formally, and informally, whether it's through the images and the monuments that we produce. There's always different actions at different levels that take place to do with thinking about how people lay claim to space and how that relationship then brushes up against different claims that are being made to that space by different agents. So your state, communities, individuals, and so on and so forth. Relationships that some are very personal, some are much more longer running and historical. And so I would almost say that to ask that question and to think about how those three sort of facets of our lives interface is precisely the kind of work that Peterson's images invite us to do.
The other thing about, and this is drawing as a discipline, I think one is that the practice of drawing at its most basic has to do with demarcation. There's also that, like if you go to the word, so to the entomology, what is that? The big, yeah, is it? That's it? Yeah, so if you look at the actual act of action, not act, the actual action of drawing, you basically are demarcating. Because in most cases, what is your matrix, which will be the surface you're looking at, is demarcation. Is it script? Is it illustration? Is it whatever? So there's Frank Wale, I think a while back, number of you would actually say that what is doing? Drawing is taking a dot for a walk. But it means you insert yourself, and that first point is actually always a dot, and then you have the infinity of possibilities beyond that. Are you going to, is it script? Is it illustration? Is it, when you write the sculpture, is it legislation? That's all part of that space. Is it trying to visualize for the built environment? There's also that. Is it strategy? So I think one of the things, part of, and maybe I didn't highlight this, that what draws me to drawing as a practice is that at its basic, most basic point, it really is how the world gets built. There's that you'll go all the way to rock art, and pull it all the way to Damien Hirst's, skull encrusted in diamonds. So there's that. But yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Peterson and Jonathan. It's fantastic. Just following up on the last question, because there is something very subversive about everything that you're doing. I feel like you're always trying to undermine different types of power relationships, whether that's literally to do with how you make the work, the grid structure that then gets interrupted, the way that you're using other types of stenciling or images that then is interrupted by an organic form. And then you have the politics. You have literally, like we were just talking about, structures that are used to keep order or to oppress and subjugate, that are then turned on their head with a level of levity. Just so it's more just understanding your position. How do you choose the subjects that you choose? What is it that's interesting to you about those subjects? I know you've spoken about a sort of reflection on life and complexity. But what else is in there? What is it that kind of grabs you enough to make you want to create these extraordinary things?
I think there's, when you're asking that, the thought that came to my mind was literally, I think, so anchors with which I can build worlds around, and those worlds would be worlds that are informed by what is familiar, what will be present, but then also what comes from the past. There's of course what is historical. There's I think so there's this thing around so the form. Okay, so you have the central form. I have the central form. It's my work, so I have the central form. But then it's also finding out what are the possible worlds that I'm able to introduce, insert, position within the work itself that speak to, the issue, the idea, the thought that I'm engaging. So you have tabula rasa, the idea of this level of framing, and then of course the idea of also reframing, which has to do with, is it empty, is it not? But I think at its core, the point of departure will be there's a thought that I need to present, a frame, not a frame. There's a thought that I need to highlight, a frame, and then how I'm able to kind of, and this might be anchored by a singular form, which you have in the works themselves. Then you have all these, I wanted to say supporting, but supporting also becomes almost secondary. It's not. But then connected would be the word, connected facets within the work itself. Is it imagery that's symbolic, and you have that here, which comes in symbols? Is it part of, is it text? You'd also have that within the work itself. Is it forms which you'd have with, no, not forms, the effects, which would be like the white noise as an effect also. Yeah, I feel like nimepotea kwa swali. Yeah. But part of it is also just building around, you have the anchor, and then what are the connections and what are the facets that would expand what that will be. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. Mine isn't a question. It's a quote I wanted to share that came, Peterson, when you were speaking around color and normalcy. It's from my favorite book. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Maggie Nelson, Bluets, which is an entire book about her obsession with the color blue. So I'll read very quickly. No one really knows what color is, where it is, even whether it is. Can it die? Does it have a heart? Think of a honeybee, for instance, flying into the folds of a poppy. It sees a gaping violet mouth, where we see an orange flower and assume that it's orange and that we're normal.
I'm curious, do you have what are your thoughts on poetry? What are your thoughts on poetry?
Yeah, I don't have any strong thought around poetry.
Okay.
At the moment. No, but the reason let me take it back. So this week, today we are on Friday, we're on Saturday. This week, we were listening to, I think the poem is Ife. There's this reel that's been going around. So I got my boys to listen to, I think it's Michael Caine, who was do you recite a poem? I was reciting the poem If. But my favorite poem is actually Renier Mariel Rilke, and the poem is called The Panther. So, The Panther. Yeah, The Panther. So, yeah.
Congratulations, Peterson, again for the amazing show that you have on view here and the whole NCAI team. My question is on the role of the artist as truth teller and mirror to the society, looking at how this show also connects in a way with Abdul's show at African Art Trust, especially on how education brings about erasure, and even the titling of this show as Blank Slate, and as Jonathan has brought it, Blank Slate coming from erasure. And so my question is, are those two bodies of work here and that in African Art Trust connected? And do you think there's a greater role these two conversations are bringing, especially in Africa and even in our context, Kenya?
Yeah, I mean, I think totally. I love Abdul's show at Start. I think one is we also acknowledging the historical, and there's also kind of a form of highlighting parts of it. I think Abdul kind of has done it, kind of very intentionally to highlight the disruption that these forms of contact kind of has unleashed. It's interesting you say that, and I think this week we have the infamous the new Pan-Africanists coming into space. And I think part of this conversation with what has been happening with the just concluded thingy, it's also, I think it's important it highlights kind of the role that I would say as artists, as creatives, in enabling these conversations. The idea that people are able to notice how destructive that kind of labeling becomes. That for somebody whose institution or infrastructure embodies disruption historically, and that's just today, for that kind of statement to be made. And I'm still trying to process it in my head, because trying to think it's either, there's a magic trick that's happening here. But then I think it's also the kind of, I don't use arrogance. There'd be for someone to make that, there's confidence. Not because I can't speak to what, but I would say the confidence to make that, to take that kind of position and declare it publicly. You might imagine it and think it, but some things should never be uttered. But I think it's a beautiful thing that was said, because it also means then we can unpack what is this, what is being Pan-African, who can inherit that, or for whom should that space be expanded to, and what kind of barriers should be in place to kind of also question intention. And I think art, it's not just Abdul's work or my work, but that same work would extend to what was happening at the Brush to conversation. You could even go further and talk about Kaigwa's show, the fact that it was also making seats, and there's a symbolism to what seats kind of, as captures, kind of would be. So I think part of the power of visual expression, creative expression, which now extends to writers, filmmakers, and all that, is also to create spaces that unpack these conversations and sometimes even trigger them. There's also that. Yeah. But yes, I do acknowledge, and Abdul has done a brilliant job with that also. Yeah. And thank you for your sentiments on this. Yeah.
Okay. With those few words, I'd like to bring today's session to a close. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you to Peterson and to Jonathan for this conversation. My thanks to the NCAI team as well, the people in the room, Kelvis, Buki, Kaniz, Michael, the rest of you who are in other parts of the building, thank you for all the work that you do to make these events possible. Yeah, and I think I'll ask us to stop there for now. Thank you very much, and a round of applause for our speakers today.